Will you pray for me? May the words of my lips and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So I, as a pastor, and in fact any worship leader who's up at the front of the church, has a privilege. Every Christmas Eve, we get to see one of the most beautiful sights there is. Every Christmas Eve, we stand up here, and just near the end of the service, somebody starts singing Silent Night, and somebody else lights a candle, and they pass the light up and down the rows. And before it's all done, there's a sea of glowing faces. A sea of shining, peaceful faces looking up at us. That's how it is in most churches. At Plymouth Church, the pastor's not the only one who gets to see this vision. If you haven't been here on Christmas Eve, you might not know that this church gets up and rings the sanctuary so they can see each other's faces. If you've been here, you know how beautiful it is. You know that this is how God sees us all year long. You know that that glowing face, that's what it looks like when you look down into the manger. It's one of the two most beautiful sights of the church year. So Jesus goes up the mountain, and he has with him his 3 disciples, and they're having trouble keeping awake, those disciples, and you can't really blame them. Jesus prays a lot for a long time. But they do try, and suddenly they shoot to their feet, because there is Jesus with his robes glowing, and Luke says that his face is transfigured. Luke doesn't say how, but in the other Gospels they say that his face shines like the sun. And they see him standing there talking to Moses and Elijah, and this is how they're telling you. They want to be sure you know that Jesus is a bigwig. Just in case you didn't know before, they want you to know that he's the kind of guy that hobnobs with the best of the best. This is Elijah, the most powerful prophet there ever was. And this is Moses, the guy who gave the law to Israel. And not only gave the law to Israel, he was another guy with a shiny face. The only mortal ever to look God in the eye, and ever afterward, they say, his face shone so brightly that Moses had to wear a veil so he didn't scare the people away. And so there Jesus is talking to them, and they want to be sure you know that he's not just equal with those big wigs, he's higher than them. And so a voice comes booming out of the smoke, a voice as powerful and gentle as a mother saying, "Behold, this is my son, the chosen one. Listen to him." And there is Jesus' face glowing like the sun, and it is so beautiful. And you can't blame Peter for wanting to stay there forever. I want to talk to you this morning about the Christian year, the liturgical year. This is the great cycle that we move through every year. Liturgy is a word, it means the work of the people. So it's the work that we do here in worship each year at about the same time, the different tasks we undertake. One way to talk about the liturgical year is in terms of fasts and feasts. It's a great cycle of fasts and feasts. In Advent, which used to be much more like Lent, a penitential time, a somber time, a dark time, a fasting time, they would fast for that whole season of Advent, and then they would have the great feast of Easter, which would last 12 days. The great feast of Christmas. It would last 12 days. You've heard of the 12 days of Christmas, right? And then there would be the great long fast of Lent, and then the great festival, the great feast of Easter, and so on throughout the year. So you could talk about the year that way, and it is a good way to describe the Christian year. You could also talk about it in terms of Jesus' life. You could say we oscillate back and forth between the two poles of Jesus' birth and Jesus' rebirth, between Christmas and Easter. We're like a planet that orbits around twin suns over and over and over, and that's another good way to talk about it. Here's how I think about it. Here's how I think the transfiguration of Jesus suggests we ought to think about it. We oscillate back and forth between two poles, the two poles of Christmas Eve and Ash Wednesday. Ash Wednesday is coming up, as I said earlier. Before that, we have Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday, you've heard of that, or Shrove Tuesday, you've heard of that. It always strikes me as so funny. This has nothing to do with the sermon, but I'm just going to say it. The two traditions for that Tuesday before Lent starts, Mardi Gras and Shrove Tuesday. Shrove Tuesday comes from the Northern European Protestants, right? And Mardi Gras comes from Southern European Catholics. And it's just so different. You can tell so much about their worldviews by looking at how they celebrate this holiday. So there's Mardi Gras, where you put on masks and have a great big feast and do all kinds of things you shouldn't do without anyone being able to tell who you are, right? And there's beads and feasts and parades, and it's totally over top. And then there's Shrove Tuesday, where you confess and eat pancakes. We're having Mardi Gras at Plymouth Church, but I think we've nailed it. I think we have found the perfect middle road. We're going to have a church potluck for Mardi Gras. There are no beads. Well, there are a few, but not many, and there are no masks. Well, actually, our kids will make masks, but I'm pretty sure that you'll be able to get out of this celebration without a hangover or any embarrassing pictures on Facebook. So I just think that we've nailed it. And then comes Ash Wednesday. And Ash Wednesday may not make sense if you don't know the rest of the story of the Transfiguration, if you don't know what happens next in the story after the mountain. Here's what happens. Jesus and the 3 disciples, they come down the mountain and they find a great crowd there, and they're all agitated, and Jesus says, "What's happening?" And a man says, "Teacher, it is my son. A spirit takes hold of him from time to time, and it dashes him to the ground, and he thrashes, and he foams at the mouth. And sometimes it casts him into the water, and sometimes it casts him into the fire. He keeps falling into the fire, teacher, and he is my only son. Can you help me?" And Jesus does. And it doesn't say how he does it. Jesus can heal at a distance, but he doesn't seem to like to. It's not how he usually does it, so I imagine him getting down on his knees next to that boy, thrashing in the ashes and the dirt and the mud. And I imagine him putting his arms around him and putting his forehead right to that boy's forehead until the thrashing stops and the breathing slows and his eyes open up. And don't you think that when Jesus stood up from pressing his forehead to the forehead of that boy from the fire, don't you think Jesus had a big smudge of ash right here? And don't you think that was as beautiful as he had ever looked? I said that Christmas Eve, when you all have your candles lit, when we all have our candles lit, was one of the 2 most beautiful sights of the year. For my money, the second is Ash Wednesday. If Christmas Eve is how you look when you gaze into the manger, Ash Wednesday is how you look when you gaze into the mirror. When you see yourself as you really are, a mortal, short of days and full of trouble. When you remind yourself that whether we want to or not, whether we choose to or not, whether we can avoid it or not, we all roll around in the dirt sometimes. Don't you? Aren't you there sometimes because you're like Jesus, because you're trying to help someone who's trapped there by addiction or by sin, by illness or by poverty, by choice or by circumstance? And aren't you down there sometimes because you chose to go there? And that's what Ash Wednesday is. That's what that great parade of people with those smudges on their forehead is. It's being honest about the dirt from which we come and the dirt to which we will return. It's being honest about the ashes of the fires into which the demons that afflict us cast us, whether we want to be there or not. That's what Ash Wednesday is. It's about being so brave, so bold, It's about daring to tell the world what we know about ourselves and about the world. It's about daring to tell them what we have promised, that we will get dirty with those who are dirty, though they did not choose it. It's about proclaiming that dirt is not a terrible thing. It is what we are made from. It is that to which we will return. It is the thing that holds the world together. It's about proclaiming that we are imperfect but climbing, dirty and glowing, that I'm high but grounded, sane but overwhelmed, lost but hopeful, that I am wrong and I'm sorry, that I am sick but beautiful. You can do the Christian year as feasts and fasts, and that's okay. You can do the Christian year as a moving through Jesus' life, and that's certainly okay. Here's how I think of it. Here's what Transfiguration says about it. That the Christian year oscillates between Christmas Eve and Ash Wednesday, the top of the mountain and the ashes at the bottom. The day when your face glows and the day when it has a big dirty smudge on it. The 2 days when you will be as beautiful as you will ever